Welcome to our video on sex and religion. I'm Dr. Rebecca Barrett Fox, the instructor for this course. In this module, we're going to focus on the intersection of sex and religion, how religious practices, beliefs, religious piety, religious rituals affect and are affected by our sexual desires, identities, behaviors, etc. So as always, we have two themes for this module, social construction and social inequality. If you need a reminder of what those concepts are, you can go back to the videos that I've put on our Blackboard site that introduce those concepts in more detail. Social construction, as a reminder, is the idea that if we define situations as real, they have real consequences. So in terms of religion, our religion doesn't have to be real, true, false, measurable, falsifiable, in order for it to be meaningful. And it can have meaningful, real-life, practical, pragmatic consequences in our life, both good and bad, whether or not it's accurate. So when we talk about religion, the truth of religion doesn't matter here. What matters is how it impacts our lives. So when you think first about a concept that's important in a lot of world religions, the concept of virginity as socially constructed. So thinking again about social construction means how do we make things collectively as a culture that then become impactful in our society. And so I want you to think about what is a virgin. Here I've put up a classic picture of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. But take a few minutes in your own notes and define what a virgin is. Go ahead and write it down. All right, so you've probably written down something about how a virgin is a person who hasn't had sex. That introduces the question for us, what's sex? How do you know if you've had sex? Are all types of sex, all sexual behaviors equal? Are they all equivalent in making a person not a virgin? So if the definition of a virgin is a person who hasn't had sex, what has a person had? What is sex that would make a person not a virgin? Is it merely or only vaginal penetration by a penis? Well, if that's the case, that would then exclude all sexual contact or contact of a sexual nature between same-sex couples. Does it have to involve penetration of some kind? Would that make fellatio, that is oral sex performed on a man, or cunnilingus, oral sex performed on a woman? Are they acts that make a person not a virgin? What about kissing? Is that sex? We'll go to a clip here. So an older TV show some of you may have seen. This is from TLC. It used to be called the Learning Channel.
Sunday.
I'm 30 and I'm a virgin. I'm 29 and I'm a virgin.
I'm not a virgin entirely by choice.
We're saving our first kiss for our wedding.
I now declare you to be husband and wife. Ryan, you may kiss your bride.
Really?
Yes.
Virgin Diaries, an all-new special. Sunday at 9, only on TLC.
This is a whole TV show based upon the premise that virginity is something that we can measure, that it can be clearly defined. And you see in that clip, they rub cheeks together. They blink.
Swing. You
Uh,
get on and then it goes with me.
Uh-huh.
Woo!
Yeah, I'm 31 and I have never kissed.
They blink their eyelashes against each other. Is that a sexual behavior or not a sexual behavior? And then we see at their wedding day, they share their first kiss. Sometimes the word for this is being a lip virgin, that we haven't had a kiss, a sexualized kiss. It doesn't mean they haven't, kissed their grandma, but they haven't kissed on the mouth a person of the opposite sex with whom they are sharing a sexual bond. Is that person a virgin? Is that what makes a person virgin or not a virgin? So we might think that we know, but in fact, these are areas that we have a lot of debate about. And the debates we have vary in their importance. For some cultures or for some individuals within the culture, that may be very important. For some subcultures, that may be very important. And religions oftentimes draw very clear lines about what is or is not a sexual behavior. And what is or is not a sexual behavior that rises to the level of being a non-virgin. Well, oftentimes in the most explicit cases, when we talk about defining virginity, we talk about penetration. So this would be in a heterosexual context, penetration by a penis of a vagina reaching the level of the hymen. So we can know that a woman's a virgin if her hymen is intact. And that's sometimes used as a measure, a way to operationalize, that is, to turn into something measurable, virginity. So then if we do that, we have to know what's a hymen. So this is a diagram, comes to us from the Center for Young Women's Health at Boston Children's Hospital. So it's like if you were looking up, so if a woman had her legs open, so this would be like her breasts, right here's her buttocks. And so the hymen is a membrane that covers the vaginal opening. And so oftentimes we say, well, if that membrane is gone, that means the woman has had sex, she has been penetrated. This makes her an object of someone else's sexual behavior. And that's how we know she's not a virgin. And so the thinking here is that we could inspect a woman and determine by the placement of that hymen, if it's there or not, if she is a virgin. You see there's no equivalent way of operationalizing so that we can measure whether a man's penis has been inside a vagina. We can't determine that. So the burden for defining and proving virginity is always on women. And this is one way in world history and in contemporary cultures, some contemporary cultures, we continue to measure if a woman is a virgin. Is that hymen intact? If it's not, then she's had sex. If it is, then she hasn't had sex. Right? Easy peasy. We should be able to figure that out. Well, there's lots of problems with this. This drawing is what we call typical. They use the word normal here. I think that typical would be a better word. Hymen. And you see the hymen doesn't actually cover the entire vaginal opening. In fact, rather than thinking of the hymen as like a wall that you have to break through, it's probably more accurate to think of it as a curtain that actually moves aside. And when you enter a room through a curtain, it can close behind you. But there are other ways that a hymen can be. So you can see here 3 different variations of the hymen. With an imperforate hymen, that means there's no opening. So in a typical hymen, there is an opening. This is how menstrual blood leaves the body. In an imperforate or a microperforate, which would have a very small hole, very small opening, it's hard for the menstrual blood to leave the body. And so oftentimes in the teen years is when this becomes obvious, and a girl may go through a very minor surgical procedure that it would actually open that hole so that blood can leave the body. Or there could be a septate hymen. Like a septum is the bone in the middle of your nose, or the bone and cartilage in the middle of your nose. That is your septum. Septum is the center part here. We may get actually 2 holes. So if you're looking to a woman's hymen as evidence of something, if you expect this to be what her hymen should look like, that is, it's never been perforated. If she is a virgin, it should look like this. biologically, these are anomalies. They're not typical, and they're not actually good for women's health because, as I mentioned, menstrual blood can't leave the body. And by adulthood, a lot of women have hymens that are not visible. So this idea that at penetration, a woman should experience pain because her hymen is being, quote unquote, broken, and we have colloquial terms for this, and that as a consequence, she should, one, have pain, and two, she should produce blood, are myths. And yet they're very important myths in some cultures. In cultures in which if a woman does not produce blood, she is not seen as a virgin, and therefore she can be returned to her family. So her husband can put her aside. Or she can be executed. Keeping our focus on this very narrow concept of virginity as measured for women by having an intact hymen, even though we know that most women don't have quote unquote intact hymens, that that's not actually how it works. Doesn't matter if it's real. What matters is that we believe it and it becomes real in its consequences. And some of those consequences include social inequality. That is, different opportunities and outcomes determined by different social statuses. So if we say that one woman is a virgin and one woman is not a virgin, socially, we may treat her differently. Now in the U.S., that generally matters less than in other cultures and less than it used to. But within certain subcultures, it may matter a whole lot. Worldwide, virginity is still oftentimes seen as a commodity, a thing that can be bought, sold, traded. So, for example, in sex trafficking, girls who are trafficked as virgins are much more valuable to their traffickers. So if a sex trafficker or pimp can sell a girl as a virgin, he's able to sell her for much more money. But we don't have to look at illegal markets of trafficking. We could just even look at worldwide cultures that promise future grooms that the woman they're getting is sexually pure, and that thinking behind this is that all of her sexuality belongs to him. She hasn't given it away and therefore diluted her value by having sex with other people. This matters so much that we have a worldwide market for artificial hymens. They look, this is one product. They look kind of like those Listerine mouth strips that you can buy at the grocery store. They're like little thin green plasticky strips. These are red. You insert them into the vagina and they kind of dissolve. You have about 15 minutes to have intercourse, and at the end of intercourse, you get fake blood. These are used in pornography. They're used in fetish sites. They're used in sex trafficking. So the same girl can be sold repeatedly as a virgin. And they're also used by women who live in cultures where if you don't produce blood, you won't be considered a virgin. So it could be women who have had sex previously, or women who just understand that they may be running a big risk if they don't produce blood that is not possible for them to produce, because that's not how hymens actually work. But again, when a culture believes this, it becomes important or valuable with real implications. So this is one website where you can go to shop for a new hymen, and you see what it promises. You can marry in confidence. Your secret is kept. What's your secret? You had sex previously. It's also for people who have a virginity fetish, right? So you can bring the va-va-voom back to your bedroom. Spice up your sex life. And they give you instructions. They send you 2 in a package if you mess up inserting the first one. and they give you in discreet packaging so that your family won't know what you're doing. Some countries have banned these. Egypt has a ban on them because the idea is that women are using them somehow to trick men into treating them like they're virgins when they're not. There are also physicians, surgeons, who will perform for you surgeries that give the illusion of an intact hymen. And we might be critical about these products and these surgeries. And so you think about the women who are very desperately making these choices to use them, clearly fearful for their lives or for their marriage if it becomes known that they're not a virgin, or, as I said, even if they haven't had sex previously, if they're unable to produce blood, which is not how hymens work, so that's generally speaking, there's not going to be blood during a first sexual encounter. They know that if they don't, that their culture still may shame them or harm them. How much so? Harm up to the point of death. This is a image from a protest against honor killings. Honor killings are most common in Muslim and Sikh cultures. That's S-I-K-H. Particularly in Pakistan, Afghanistan. And these are male family members, as well as can include women, female family members, men and women in a family, who kill women in the family for bringing shame on the family. And that shame often includes sexual shame. So not being a virgin at marriage, having sex outside of marriage. This is not the traditional religious teaching within traditional Islam. I want to make that very clear. The Quran, that is the holy book of Islam, prohibits honor killing and murder of any kind. Yet worldwide we know it's a problem. I also want to point out, though, in the U.S. we don't use the word honor killing to describe violence against women, and yet 3 women every day are killed by ex-partners or by partners. And over 90% of women who are murdered by their partners or their ex-partners, husbands, boyfriends. That in fact, the biggest danger to a married woman is the man who sleeps next to her at night. Now, these killings are not obviously all linked to virginity, but they share with honor killings a theme or a kind of underlying logic that women belong to men, that women's sexuality belongs to men, that women owe sex to men, that women who violate those expectations it's justifiable to kill them. And so these are very large numbers in the U.S. of women who are killed. Again, I don't want to say it's explicitly because their boyfriends find out they're not virgins or husbands find out they're not virgins, but a similar logic of control over women's bodies, women's sexuality. Of course, murder is the epitome of trying to control someone else's body. I'm giving you 2 rather sad examples of the intersection of religion and sexuality. That's certainly not the only way that religion and sex intersect. And I don't want to imply that there is. We could talk about really joyful, wonderful parts of religion that make sex wonderful and enjoyable for a lot of people. So the examples of virginity and the consequences of being not a virgin in particular religions is one aspect of religion and sexuality. As you read and watch your film for this module, pay attention to the questions of how religion constructs sexuality, and this objective in particular. I want you, by the time you're done reading and watching your film, to be able to articulate specific examples of how specific aspects of religion, belief, theology, ritual, law, piety, that's personal religious expression. It could be prayer, for example, or clothing you wear, the food you eat. How do those things impact personal sexual experiences, as well as cultural norms about sexual behavior, sexual desire, and sexual identity? Your next steps are to read your book, take notes, watch your chosen film, take notes, and submit your journal entries on your book chapters, either even chapters or odd chapters, and your film. As you submit your journal entry, or as you write your journal entry, be sure that your entry at some point addresses that weekly objective right here. Wherever you do that in your journal entry, bold it so I can see it. You're also going to submit some posts this week to Blackboard, and as always, ask questions if you're unsure of what to do.